Greetings, brothers and sisters. I watched this Simone Biles thing last night, and then I watched this documentary right after it that was really kind of disturbing as well. And so it was the combination of the two things. But, the Olympics, the way the Olympics is limping along in America specifically. And I have lots of narratives and scenarios here, but all of them lead to like one conclusion that America is so ripe, you know, to be picked off, right? America's just like everything in America isn't as good as it was a couple years ago. Like everything's kind of ruined now. And this Olympics is the latest addition to that, and how America is so vulnerable and, fragile and just everything about it. And so I want to go through these various narratives and different, ideas of what's happening here. And so in looking at the Simone Biles, I want to go with the official story first and also say it looked fake as F, right? It looked really fake. The whole Simone Biles thing withdrawing from her team and the way that they played out the narrative. And it looked like you're watching a bad movie. But so much of America right now looks like you're watching a bad disaster movie, like a B disaster movie. And, like Joe Biden is the bumbling president, right? Kamala is the clueless vice president. And the media and the celebrities and all the stuff that they're pushing, in a B-level disaster movie, they're building up the idea that you deserve what you're about to get, right? And that's what it feels like. So whether it's completely staged, partially staged, or just something that's happening based in divine providence, it all looks like a bad B movie. Like it's just poor acting, bad storylines, and just, tragic decisions, tragic characters. So yesterday when Simone Biles quit, I was like, I don't want to get into this, right? I wasn't planning to watch the gymnastics. And then it said it was because of emotional reasons and what seemed to be some sort of a panic attack. I said, all right, this is something I should cover, right? And, and I did a little bit at the end of the video yesterday. So I watched the gymnastics. I tuned in. My wife and I tuned in just when she was about to do her vault. And Nastia Lukin, who I believe she must be from Russia, Russian descent, maybe, I don't know. But she's an American girl that won the gold medal over Shawn Johnson some years back, I think. And she's now an announcer. And she started to say right before the vault, the pressure, the global pressure, not just in the gymnastics world or not just for America, but the global pressure for Simone Biles carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders, the pressure of her performance, right, as a gymnast. And that was said over and over again by various pundits, and in the news media, that she was carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. The pressure of her performance as a gymnast was the weight of the world on her shoulders. And later on, Michael Phelps was saying the same thing, right? And so I can recognize talking points, right? Like I cover talking points all the time. And when there's these talking points that are universally used, like people had a meeting and they said, make sure you say Simone Biles had the weight of the world on her shoulders. Like make sure you use that phrase. I mean, that's what it appears to be. All across NBC Sports, that was being used over and over again. The immense pressure. And so this announcer, this former gold medalist in, the Olympics, is saying how much pressure Simone Biles is under. And then the other guy, who's also a former gymnast, said she's in rarefied air. No one can really understand this because she's like the Michael Jordan of gymnasts. She's the GOAT of gymnastics, the best ever, according to everybody. And nobody knows what it's like to be that except for her and a few other people, right? And so no one can understand the pressure she's under. So that's before the vault, which is, I guess, one of her signature events and where America was supposed to dominate the Russians and other rivals. And so then she does the vault and she comes out of it with a scared look on her face. And, either she's a great actress or something's really happening to her. And I have a couple of interesting ideas of what that could be. Not things that I can prove, but just, various scenarios, various sort of things that, would fit into what's happening. But she had like what appeared to be some sort of a panic attack, pulled out of her flip or whatever it was, and then went to the sidelines and basically started to say, they could pick up some of her audio that she didn't want to get hurt, and she didn't want to do something stupid because she was broken mentally, like she had lost her confidence, which happens in sports, and gymnastics is very dangerous. So that's believable, right? Even though it looks staged and faked, even though it looked like it's happening in a way that just with the talking points, and they were even building this up beforehand. I think even more so. She was the face of the United States team, and this was being talked about. And then, of course, what happened with Naomi Osaka and all these athletes talking about mental illness and things, and this idea of, having a mental breakdown and withdrawing from an event based on pressure. Like that's a whole new narrative. There's a whole documentary coming out with Naomi Osaka. Like, why is that happening now? Like, why hasn't that happened throughout the history of athletics, especially in America, where this thing, someone would be savaged for quitting, right? Because of the pressure, right? Because of their emotional state, especially in sports, but in anything. America doesn't, people don't surrender and they don't quit and they don't give in to fear. And you're going to beat cancer, right? This can do, just do it Nike attitude, right? But now they reverse the script. So I'm going to come back to some of these more, truther narratives in a second, but I want to go through the official story. And then this woman writes on MSNBC News, I see this yesterday, I think it was right before the competition, I can't remember the whatever, but it's kind of significant. This person writes an op-ed piece for NBC, with MSNBC, which is covering the Olympics, and it says, Simone Biles withdraws from Olympics team final after vault miss, proving she's the GOAT. But here's the best part of it, the tagline: it takes more strength to throw off enormous expectations than it takes to live up to them. So quitting is the new strong, right? Giving in and submitting to the pressure and quitting is the new strong in America. Now, again, I'm not all America, all this stuff, right? I don't, I've always kind of felt that was BS, right? And there's just too much emphasis on these Olympics and things. And then it says here, it took the lowest vault score of the Olympic gymnast career for Simone Biles to seal her position as the greatest of all time. She gave up having others judge where she might place and put herself first, and that makes her the GOAT. So I want to get into some of the more truther narratives and why America is now so vulnerable, and the way, one of the ways that this looked like a B movie where America's on the ropes and about to be taken down, right? By rivals and just ripe for the picking. But first, what's believable about it? So then they brought in Nastia Liukin to talk to Mike Tirico about what happened. And she had what, in baseball would be called a slump, or a pitcher not being able to throw a strike, or, in basketball you get these things as well. People freezing up, choking on the free throw line, right? These things happen with athletes. I've been through this. There are times where you sort of lose your mental edge. In golf they call it the yips, and when you're playing in front of people, and then you sort of, have some sort of a panic attack, or you lose your ability, right? You lose your confidence, which happens to athletes all the time. We see athletes get broken in this way. And what they said happened was she lost herself in the air. She lost her place in the air. She didn't know where she was when she was doing the vault. And you can see it. You can see she had a scared look on her face, and she pulled out of the vault because she didn't know where she was, right? She didn't complete the final rotation of it. And that she had, lost her confidence, which is believable because that happens in athletics, right? And so that part, you could say, all right, that could be the case. And then Nastia Liukin went on to say, it's such a dangerous sport, which is something where, I've noticed this for years in the Olympics because I have trouble watching gymnastics. Like I don't have any, it's all these sports like figure skating or even something like a dunk competition where judges rate your performance. It's more like, dancing or something, right? It's more like a performance than it is an actual score. What's good about sports, there's a point system. And even that, there can be cheating with the referees and all these ways. The game can be manipulated. But in terms of these rated, where they have judges rate you based in what they see, those things for me are hard to watch. And gymnastics, particularly because of the stress, I talked about the balance beam yesterday, that they can get hurt. And the pressure of, the level of crap they're doing, the flips on those bars and all that, whatever it is. And these girls who look very like young, right? Some of them are young, some of them are still teenagers, and they are small. So they look younger, in terms of, they look like little girls out there. But their faces are like old lady faces, right? They have all these stress lines and, the amount of pressure they have to not fall on the various apparatuses. And so I could see if they lost their edge and they didn't have confidence and they're flipping around all that stuff, with wooden beams and poles, these vaults and things, you could get seriously hurt, right? I mean, you can get hurt in diving and you're landing in water. Like if you over rotate or whatever it is. I mean, anybody who's had a belly flop, these high dives and things, know what that feels like. But these, if you fall on the balance beam or something like that, you can be seriously like injured, right? And it's just scary to flip around and, all these things. I mean, you have to lose your natural fear of it. So I could see where if somebody lost their mental edge, and cracked mentally, that this could be the outcome. It would be dangerous for them to go out there. Like anything that you're doing that involves heights and, flipping in this case, if you're not mentally ready to do it and you have lost your confidence and you're having panic attacks and things, well, then it'd be a bad idea to push yourself into it. So it's a believable story, but why now, right? And then there's the other aspects of the story, because when they do these rotations on the various apparatuses, right, there's two teams that do the rotations together. And they were paired up with the Russians. And the Russians were going to take the silver. America was the overwhelming favorite. But now they're competing head-to-head with the Russians. And we know all about the Russians, right, in terms of Hillary Clinton, Russia, all the stuff that's been said about Russia since they war blocked us in Syria, and the tensions in Russia, and Joe Biden called Putin the devil and all these things, right? And so now Russia is with America. They're waiting to pick America off. I mean, only the Chinese would be the only other narrative that you could put in there that would be as substantial. And they're competing basically head-to-head on these various apparatuses. And Simone Biles, the big weapon, America's big gun, is gone, right? She just quits. And so, and before this even happened, before we watched this, I was walking around, my wife and I were walking around on we have like this path in the pasture, we go for walks. And I was saying to her, that the Olympics has always been a substitute for war. I mean, that's what it was designed to be, because there's all these tensions and rivalries between countries, and they can be settled on the athletic field in a more peaceful way. But sports in itself is warlike, right? There's a level of aggression in sports and dominance and competition. I think most people know that. They understand this. And then, the Olympics being in terms of the Cold War with the Russians, and it shows strength, right? America's way, the capitalist way versus the communist way, and Russia and China. And it shows strength and which system is superior and bragging rights and all of it. And America has its stars and its big guns, and Simone Biles was it, right, for America this year, this, Olympics. She's the big name that was left over. She's the face of American Olympics. And then you have Naomi Osaka, who quit a tournament, and now they're making a Netflix documentary about why that was great and, why it's okay to quit and give in to, fear and weakness. And again, I don't give a crap about these sports and whatever. I'm just talking about the contrast between the way sports was always viewed and athletes in terms of performing. Even if you're hurt, even if you're nervous, you go out there and you deliver, right? Delivering in the clutch, being don't choke, right? Choking and all this weakness and things. When the going gets tough, the tough gets going. When you're at the most pressured and everyone's coming down on you and the weight of the world's on your shoulders, you come through. And the superhero, Marvel movies and things that are out there now, the superhero culture and coming through when the world's against you or whatever it is, when people are doubt you. They have their emotional breakdowns before coming through. And so I thought that she might come back for the individual medals or whatever, but now she's not even doing that. Like she could win the individual, like come back and regain her mental equilibrium and come back and deliver. I thought, well, they might be playing that narrative out, but now that's been taken off the table. And so if you're the Russians and the Chinese or any other country, and you're looking at America, and you have now where Americans are praising quitting, right? I mean, that's how they're going to look at it, that we look weak as hell, right? And, a metaphor for war. And we're the most divided that we've ever been, right? In terms of the left and the right and Trump and Biden, and there's infighting and all the stuff that's going on a daily basis. Many of us don't trust the official story, the news media. And people are, there's just this anger and hostility and, people confronting each other and just the internet and the division and the trolling and just, America is divided, which is the worst thing. Like if you're in a competition and you find out your opponents or the other team is divided and infighting, right? Or if like people are going through divorces, like when you're in a divorce situation or something like that, where you're, breaking up with somebody that you once said that you were going to love forever and things, and, all the stuff that happens in this nasty divorces, and America's going through a nasty divorce. America is looking so weak and vulnerable right now on every level. And my wife and I are talking about this, and then we come in, and we already know that the Russians beat Americans. America ended up getting the silver medal, and they're paired on these different apparatuses, right? So there's these 4 things that they do, and they're going along, and the Russians and them are taking turns on these apparatuses, and the Russians are the only ones that have any shot at beating the Americans. And so Simone Biles goes out, and they say the Russian coach had said Simone Biles is 70% of the American team because she competes in all 4 events, and she's like the best at all of them, right? That's why they call her the GOAT. And so she just has to have a good performance, and she raises the level of her team. But now that she's out, some of these girls who weren't, going to be on the uneven bars or the horse, one girl who, had a bad performance earlier on in the Olympics in some of these events, wasn't scheduled and wasn't ready to go on them. So now this is causing panic, and the announcers are feeding into it, right? And so they go directly, I think, to the balance beam, which is the scariest one because it's a 4-inch beam that's hard as a rock, and they're flipping around and shit on it, And and when they fall, it's if they miss it, with their foot and they come down and they smash their face or head, whatever it is, right? I mean, it's the potential for disaster. And 2 of the Russian girls that are supposed to be great at it fall. One of them has a disastrous routine. And I'm like, I know that the Russians are already going to win because it's already happened. But I'm like, they're not performing or taking advantage of the weakness or vulnerabilities. And so the American girls step up. And then the other announcer that isn't Nastya Lukin, the guy, says, there's no quit in this team about the Americans. And I'm like, what do you mean the greatest American gymnast of all time just literally quit, right? Like it's getting like stupid B-movie level kind of stuff, right? So I'm in the editing process of this video, and I, have to sometimes add something that I forgot, something that I consider important. And, most of us quit. Like many people dream to be a professional athlete or go to the Olympics. Like kids get inspired. I don't know what kids are going to get inspired by this Olympics, but you get inspired to rise to a high level and be great, achieve greatness in something. And I don't think that's a good thing. Like now, years later and doing the heartfulness meditation, I mean, great spiritually doesn't exist, right? because greatness is, egotistical and narcissistic, and it's the idea of excellence and greatness in a way removes your humility. It makes you special, right? And so I don't agree with that. I'm not saying this is something that I endorse, but it's what America's about: being special, excelling, achieving greatness. And you're celebrated for that. You're celebrated for your achievement. And many of us quit this, right? Many of us start off wanting to be great, wanting to be special. Many of us want to achieve something academically, or be an actor, or whatever, model, whatever, politician. People want to be special, seen as better. And at some point we give up on it or never start that process. And that's where Simone Biles is now, right? Like, she shouldn't be called the GOAT because she's made herself just like everyone else. She didn't even try, right? She gave in to whatever she was feeling inside. I'm not, whatever, right? It doesn't matter to me. But let's call it what it is. In terms of this American narrative, she's no longer special, right? She was somebody who used to be great at gymnastics, but now she's a quitter. She doesn't participate. That happens when you retire anyway. At some point, you're going to quit. At some point, age is going to get the best of you, or something else. In this case, the pressure. Like being singled out, and, this idea, like the metaphor, because it's a metaphor for America. America is no longer great, right? Make America Great Again has failed. Like, not that I believed in that, but it's failed. And America isn't great. And America has the weight of the world on its shoulders, just like Simone Biles, right? This is part of, I think I say this somewhere in this narrative, but she's no longer special. She just made herself like everybody else and shouldn't be praised for it, because we all do that, right? We all quit on stuff, and maybe it's the best thing. Usually it's the best thing because we're not good enough, right? We have another path in life, and so we didn't have the talent or the drive, or we didn't get the breaks, or whatever it is, right? And so everyone gives up on trying to be special. Only a few people achieve it, and those people eventually quit, and they stop being great and special. And that's a metaphor for America. Like, that's what you're seeing now. Her giving up and them celebrating it, celebrating being ordinary, right? I didn't participate in the Olympics either. She participated one day or whatever. But the rest of us didn't participate either. And so she's like, there's nothing different now between Simone Biles and the rest of us. And one more thing to add before I return to the original narrative here is that the saying is, it's okay not to be okay. It's okay to be broken. That's the saying that's going on all over the place. It's okay to not be okay. And, I talk about this all the time when I say that people say, well, I don't agree with 100% of what you say, or, thinking that other people or yourself needs to be perfect. And that's not possible. Like in the heartfulness meditation, perfection is impossible. Even though you have these spiritual, gurus or leaders of churches or leaders of religions and things like this that are considered perfect, perfection only exists in the divine system. And that's a system without ego or identity. God can't psych himself out. God can't get self-conscious and, get shook and rattled, right? And make mistakes or get egotistical. And so there's no ego there. There's no individuality. God's in everything and is a part of everything and is the essence of love. And it's, perfect in its subtlety. It's, its energetic makeup. But everything else in the universe is subject to make mistakes and learn and grow and things like this. We all do that. So this idea that it's okay to not be okay shouldn't be out there at all, because no one's perfect anyway. But this idea where you're supposed to do something, you're working to achieve it, and you can just quit on it, and it's okay not to be okay. It's okay not to perform your jobs. Well, there's a pressure there, right? Like, meals have to be put on the table. Kids don't understand this. I was talking to my kids about this. The meals have to show up on the table, right? People have to perform their duties, because otherwise, people die, right? You have to do what you're supposed to do. Animals have a role in nature, and if you don't if they don't perform their role, then whole ecosystems can be wiped out, right? Everything has a purpose, and you have to find it and complete it. No excuses. No, it's okay not to be okay, right? It's withdrawing from what you're supposed to do. But in a broken system where broken people are being celebrated, then it's okay to be not okay is, going to be the mantra or slogan. But that's what happens when you have a system and a country that's collapsing. Okay, back to the original narrative here. And so they go through all the events, and the one girl, the child's girl, who's supposed to be Simone Biles' friend, she falls in the floor routine where she's flipping around, and so the Russians win. And so there's a lot of falling, it wasn't like a high-level performance, and it wasn't a great year for world gymnastics. If Simone Biles just showed up and had an average routine, they would have won probably by a lot, right? And so, like I said, America looks weak as hell, and then the celebration of her quitting starts happening. Like what a great idea it was, and why it's necessary to do such things. And again, I don't care. Like I said, they should get rid of gymnastics altogether. These gymnasts age like presidents do. Like you see the president, they come in and they age like 10 or 20 years, in a 4 to 8 year period. They get all these stress lines, and you see this in certain jobs. And you see it with these gymnastic girls. I mean, they age, and you see that they're accelerated stress lines and all of it. And that's for all these athletes. Like you talk to these athletes or you see them interviewed or something. I talked about going to the Basketball Hall of Fame, and these guys are walking in, limping in, hobbling in. Like one guy was in a wheelchair, and their arms and the way they walk. And you can see it with some of the coaches, right? Their bodies have been wrecked, but also their life energy isn't there. There's this energy, right? The transmission, the spiritual energy that you receive when you're doing the heartfulness meditation is called pranahuti. And there's this energy called prana. There's pranayama, which is you're moving your energy with your breath, right? It's a form of yoga. It's one of the, it's one of the limbs of Patanjali's 8 limbs of Ashtanga yoga. And, there's all these ways that people use this pranic energy. It's the creative force. It goes into, children. It goes into having kids and things. Different in a woman and a man, but you have this creative force in you, this life force. It's called Jing in the Chinese medicine. They have, various ways of viewing this. But you have this life energy, this subtle energy, right? There's electricity and there's other energies in your body. But in terms of, the spiritual energy, there's this prana. And when you do the heartfulness meditation, you get this transmission, which is called pranahuti, which comes, from heart to heart. And it helps to restore your love bank and, all the rest of it, right? It helps to boost your pranic energy. And there's also pranic healing. My son took some of this pranic healing. It's a more subtle thing than Reiki, right? Reiki, where people use energy to heal other people. So there's all these things. And so these athletes, they just are, gorging on their prana, devouring their prana, and using it up at a much quicker rate. That's why when they get older, they don't have anything left in their tanks, right? One of the things that I feel blessed about, because I played basketball and I had athletic ability and I'd hoped to do something with it when I was younger, but I'm glad it didn't work out because I have a lot more energy left in my system to do other things that wouldn't be there had I, put a lot more energy into, sports, my, athletic years, my athlete days. And that's something that isn't really that important, like it just, now it's like, I'm glad I didn't use up that much energy. But you see this in athletes already. And you see this specifically in these, the stress level in gymnastics. So I don't care if they got rid of gymnastics altogether, but they haven't, or make it less, competitive and, in terms of the performance. It just keeps getting harder, and the degree of difficulty and the risk level and the stress and the pressure just keep on building. And again, that's what the Olympics has done, is become more competitive, and, there's various ways that they're cheating and all these things, right? And so if you look at the Americans in the Olympics and the American team, there's very few famous people, like from past Olympics. They all sort of retired. And the Olympic, the performance that's happening in the Olympics from the Americans and just the mental attitude. Sha'Carri Richardson getting stoned and everybody saying you should be able to smoke pot and still go to the Olympics. Like, that's how it started off. The American basketball team and all the stuff that happened with the protests and taking a knee and, the loss of, sports just isn't as good as it was, all the stuff with COVID and the way that they canceled sports and, and it just wasn't as good the last year as it had been in the past. And a lot of people are angry and, along political lines are not rooting for the American basketball team, rooting against them, and NBC trying to cash in on the, Peacock Plus, right? So you can only watch the games. You can watch America suck there. And so Simone Biles was, the big face of the Olympics, and then she just quits for whatever reason, right? Legitimate or not, real or not. And so then they're competing against this big rival, Russia, which ends up crushing the American girls, right? And, it's interesting. It's because it's a novel thing that's happened, but it sucks. At the end of it, you're like, well, that sucks. Like, that's, it's not the kind of narrative you see play out in movies, right? And, the world of, the Hollywood world that they've created, these stories, these backstories where the, athlete rises above their doubt and their weaknesses and rises to the challenge. And that's all you've ever heard. That's what Americans are supposed to do. And you see it in war movies and heroic movies and sports movies and in real sports. And, they banish and destroy the choker, the person that quits, the person who gives up. And they applaud, briefly because it's a negative culture. They always go after the weak, right? But the strong who persevere under, doubt and injuries and all the things and end up winning a championship and, all these ways, the Michael Jordan, the killer instinct, the Kobe Bryant, right? The black mamba, the venomous snake that has the killer instinct and can, hit the winning shot and, under the worst type of circumstances. That's all you've ever seen. That's the way America is supposed to be. And now they're applauding somebody for giving in on their weaknesses and letting their doubts overcome them, right? Like, that's the opposite of everything you've ever heard. And in a world full of, America having this military and all these things, and America looking so weak, this, this senile, dementia-ridden president, and just the infighting and the division and the, the not my president, the Trump supporters still, all this stuff that's going on and the January 6th stuff and everything. And America looks like, just come over and push us over because we won't fight back at all. And young people just, are supposed to, they've been told over and over again, just quit and, give in to your depression and, just wallow in it, right? Billie Eilish and all these people. This is, a part of the American culture now where young people are told there's, you have no future and everything's pointless. Just the depressive affect and they're switching everything up and, cultivating mental illness and weakness and celebrating the broken people, right? And just all the effects of depression, of the lockdowns and, suicide rates have doubled and it's just getting so bad so quickly. Like, everything's just imploding. America's imploding right now. And everyone can see it. It's on display, right? And, there's a couple of things I wanted to add to this. A couple of various scenarios or things that, based in speculation. There's not much I can prove about this and don't really want to because of the nature of the thing. But one thing that people overlook, I still have all these flubies that come in. Somebody gave me a comment the other day. I don't know why. Like, I might have said something about it. I think Paul had the common cold and didn't have, the flubies are people who think that, if you say you had COVID, you really had the flu and you don't know any better. So, I don't know what COVID is. Like, I don't know. It's totally different than anything. And I'm stronger and there's things I've been doing that have, boosted my immune system, my energy level. And I'm doing all kinds of work outside and I feel like, so much better than I did even before having COVID. But my wife and I had a weird thing maybe a month ago where we both felt COVID-y. We both had like a loss of breath for like a day. It wasn't like we had COVID, but it was like we were reliving the symptoms. And the fact that we both had it, it was weird, and I was feeling great otherwise. there's a couple of things just, every once in a while, it's like it flares up in your system. I don't know what it is. I can't say it's a virus or a disease or what it is because the symptoms are weird. But again, this is, over a year and like 3 or 4 months of when we had it, right? And so it seems like there's something still there. And I don't know if it's 5G related. I have no idea. Like there's just all these ways. You could look at it and make a case for all these things. But I do know that it bothers my sleep and it bothers people had, one of the overwhelming things that people have said about the COVID, the nights are hell and it has a mental illness or mental symptoms, psychological symptoms, vivid dreams, nightmares. Usually when I'm sick, I love to sleep, right? I sleep it off ever since I had mono when I was in like fourth or fifth grade. I think it was fourth grade. And so, I like to sleep, right? Whenever I get sick, and that's the way I heal. And when I had COVID, I dreaded going to sleep. It was so bad. That was when it would get really bad. And the vivid dreams and just waking up almost like with a panic attack. And, all these people talk about this, the mental component, the mental illness sort of component, psychological, almost having people have had hallucinations and things, right? And then, of course, if you're, whatever treatments that are going around might trigger that same kind of conditions where people will have panic attacks, people will, not feel like themselves mentally and be a little rattled and shook, right? Which the illness itself does, right? If you lose your taste buds and your, and your smell and things and, weird things are happening, your inability to breathe which, difficulty breathing creates panic and all the rest of it. And so people are having psychological issues. There's people that may be asymptomatic and have, I don't know, Voldemort or something. And, they're going to have these symptoms. And that could be one explanation for what we saw with Simone Biles or Naomi Osaka, where people in America just can't do their jobs anymore. People are just panicked. They're depressed. All these things because of whatever this thing is sweeping around the country and the world. And so that's, one possibility, just throwing that out there. And then they have, there are any number of electromagnetic, you could say the 5G could cause that, or, they have maybe some sort of electromagnetic, EMF weapons and things like this. These things have been developed, microwave weapons, of course, the 5G. And, these things could be targeting people to create a sense of, rattling people on a level where they can't perform and do whatever they're supposed to do. These are just, possibilities. And then there's some sort of warfare going on here. Or, some planned way to bring America down. And this is, a big piece of it. But psychologically, just mentally, the way that you've always been told America is and how Americans are and how Americans come through and rise to the challenge, that's no longer a narrative. In fact, when they quit, when they give into the pressure, that's applauded, right? Now that's being applauded. Now she's the GOAT because she didn't rise to the challenge, right? Like that's the narrative. We're living in inverted America, like the satanic America. And I'm not saying America before was great and that, there was too much pressure and emphasis on sports and all these things. We're a warlike culture. There's lots of things about America, the before America. Like I'm not a make America great again person. I don't think America was ever great in the way people think. Great in the sense of powerful or big or whatever, but not in terms of natural and godly. So I don't, I'm not saying the old way was great, but the new way is definitely worse and it's inverted and it's not something that can be sustained, right? When people are weak, when the younger generation is told over and over that they are, their future is hopeless and, they just are watching everything implode and the Americans themselves are imploding, not just in terms of the divisions and the infighting, but in terms of the psychological conditions and just the way people are, right? And I've seen this over and over again, that America has just been backsliding. We just look like we want it to be over with. We want America to topple, right? The pressure of carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders. That's what the Simone Biles metaphor was, and that's a metaphor for America. And so I took a nap yesterday, I've had some sort of restless sleep that's once in a while this stuff comes up. And so I was pretty amped up and not tired. My wife went to bed. And so I was just thumbing through the channels, and there was this documentary on HBO about Woodstock 99. Now, I didn't even know there was a Woodstock 99. Well, what happened was I was, just flipping through the channels. So I had the Woodstock 99 was there. It was playing in the background as I searched for, something for, I wanted to watch something for about an hour, and I would get sleepy and go to sleep. But I could hear the story of what was going on, and I was like, man, that's messed up. And it was just compelling if you want to hear about just how bad humanity's gotten. Now, this is, of course, 22 years ago. So if you're not familiar with the Woodstock concerts, there was one in 1969 that involved all these hippies and, the movement, the anti-war movement, and, just all the free love and hippie movement. And it turned into a natural disaster area, but it was romanticized by the boomers. The boomers loved the idea of Woodstock. It was in upper state New York, out in the woods in a sort of a rural area. I think this one was in a similar place. And then they had one in 1995 with Nirvana and some of these other, grunge rock bands and things that were happening then that went out okay. So they decided to have a 30th anniversary one in 1999, and it was a disaster on so many levels, just brutal. Like, just going through it, I'll do a quick synopsis. But watching this after I saw the Olympics, and it wasn't just Simone Biles, it's the low energy, without fans, without any sort of star power, limping into the Olympics a year late because of COVID and everything that's happened on a global basis, and certainly in America, and everything being way worse. And then going back to the 90s, which was sort of the catalyst to what's happening here and now, right? Because, the greed of the 90s was this, greed is good. And just the privileges and the anger of the youth. American youth has always been angry for no apparent reason. And it was the onset of when the internet was just going and getting big and booming, right? And so it was the cusp of the internet and just this anger and destructive nature of the youth at that time. And when I started watching, it was like 5 or 10 minutes into the show, and there was a African-American reporter from the New York Times. And I guess DMX was up on stage, and people were shouting racial slurs or something like that. The white crowd, because it was mostly white, college-age men in the audience, and they were shouting racial slurs, and he was talking about all the black people in the audience listening to this, and some of them had come with friends of theirs, right? And they were listening to this. Like, I didn't really get, I just saw the tail end of that. And then Rosie Perez comes out on the stage, and these guys start chanting for her to, remove her top, to show them her, whats. And that was the next, 5 or 10 minutes, that all these girls were topless, and many of them were completely naked, and the people who were filming it were focusing on that, and they were they were crowd surfing and going into the mosh pits and being groped, and even worse, and that comes up later in the documentary, but they were being abused, and it's misogynistic, and they were being objectified, and that went on. Every female reporter, every time a woman walked by, the guys would chant at her, like some construction crew, to show them her whats, right? And so that was like the first piece. And so the next piece was that the security that was there, they needed lots of security, and they had to pass a test. And most of the guys didn't really have any experience. Some of them were criminals in nature, right? And they went to this class, and the last 2 hours of the class, the teacher went over all the questions in the test so they could pass the test. So they hired all these incompetent security guards, and there's people there's like a professional, like a guy who's a professional sort of security czar, and he had been a part of like Katrina and other things. He said never saw anything this bad, like just the way the security was handled. So when these kids were going through security, the security were told to make sure to not allow them to bring in any food or like liquids, any water, because they had to pay for that shit, right? Which created a disaster in itself. But they would allow them to bring in drugs if they were bribed, right? So these kids came into the venue, and there was Kanye prices for water and food. Water was like $4 a bottle, and this is in 1999, right? Like, and, it was the same price as a beer. So no one was buying the water. They had free water, but people were bathing in it because they had these showers, like a group of showers for men and women separated by a tarp. Men were pulling up the tarp, right? Like you just, crazy freaking, college level frat boy stuff. And the showers were filthy because the water wasn't draining. So people were knee deep in dirty water, right? So they started to shower in the drinking water because the showers were disgusting and unsafe. And then the drinking water, people were upset because they couldn't get access to it because people were bathing in it and there was soap in it and all these things. So somebody broke one of the lines, the water lines, so people were getting it directly out of the lines, and everything started to flood where people had tents and where the porta potties were, and the porta potties started to overflow. So it turned into this, muddy mixed with feces and urine and just all this stuff, like this muddy mess. And these college students, these young people, drunk, inebriated, stoned, whatever they were, people started to body surf in the slime, right? This water and mud and excrement. And then they went into the concert, the concert venue. It was featuring mostly heavy metal, hard rock bands. And the big names were at the time Korn and Limp Bizkit, right? So there was this, on Friday, they had all these, these guys who were covered in this like excrement, mud, crap, going into the mosh pit, which was like 110 degrees. Nobody was drinking water because it was $4 a bottle. And these guys who were running Woodstock, the guys who were in charge of the concert promoters, kept on excusing themselves and saying those prices, you expect to spend money when you come to a concert, and right? So everyone's dehydrated, and there was 220,000 people in the heat of everybody, and it was hot in upstate New York. It was like 110 degrees, like in the mosh pit. And these kids started dropping like flies. Like some of them died. Many of them were hospitalized from hypothermia and dehydration. And some of them were misdiagnosed. Like this one guy was talking about his friend disappearing when he went to see Metallica, his favorite band, and he was in the mosh pit the following night, which is a whole nother thing that happened. But anyways, he was looking for his friend, and his friend was diagnosed as being having OD, taking too much drugs, but he was really suffering from hypothermia, and so they gave him something, adrenaline something, and he died. But these kids were dropping like flies, right? And all the stuff that was happening to women in there. The security guard talked about all these sexual assaults that were happening, and the guys who promoted the concert said no, it's just a handful of them. But of course, these girls weren't coming forward, and the place was completely mob ruled. The security had, turned into, the security were like prowlers and predators themselves, right? Many of them. And so the place turned into this lawless nightmare. The heavy metal music. I mean, think about, the demonic nature of heavy metal music, how loud it is, and, how distorted, and, how it goes against your subtle bodies and your, higher level consciousness. And what happens at concerts in general, right? The mob mentality, it turns into, a horde, a hive-like mentality, and how, it's everyone gets amped up. And so they showed like Alanis Morissette playing, right? And just, the audience being like, not, totally rude, but just, tolerating her. And she was going to be followed by Limp Bizkit, who was the sort of iconic, the main attraction at the venue for whatever reason. So Limp Bizkit was, the headline act on Saturday, followed by Rage Against the Machine and Metallica, right? Metallica was, old by then. And so there was just constant heavy metal music, mosh pit, dehydration, overheating, drugs and alcohol covered in mud and feces, and it became this like mob somebody, and apparently they had like a Moby, some some sort of ecstasy rave section somewhere else, but it was the same basic crowd going over there, and that was going on all night with Moby and these other sort of, psychedelic rave type of bands, and they were all like getting scared, like all these, bands and their handlers, and MTV pulled out and was saying this is a, like basically a prison riot. These people were all, petrified of the mob that they were creating. And so when Limp Bizkit came on, like Fred Durst was amping up the crowd, and I guess they had a couple of songs, horrible songs, about just breaking shit. Like there was a song like entitled "Just Go Break Something," and they were like, crowd surfing on a piece of plywood they had torn down, and they were just ripping the place apart, right? And he was amping them up, and the concert promoters asked him to like dial it down a little bit, and he just amped them it more, and then they, it just went on all night, and then there was raves and stuff. And these kids were, many of them didn't have any money for food there, and no water, right? And there was just, unhygienic. I mean, the place is just turning into a mess. They always do, these places. I mean, it happened at the first Woodstock, and this was much worse. And these kids didn't have a purpose. They talked about how in the 1999 there was no purpose. Like in the 60s, these hippies had, anti-war and all these other things that they were protesting. But these guys were just punky, entitled kids with all this pent-up frat boy anger, and they were just, just going at it, breaking everything. There was just destruction everywhere. They were ripping down. There's billboards and things they put up there, like they were, plywood and metal and things. And they were just tearing everything apart. And so it rolled around to Saturday night, and there was a group that was promoting gun safety because that Columbine event had just happened. And they were having people sign a petition and giving everybody candles. And they were going to have a candle vigil, like one of those candlelight, everyone lights the candles. But, the thing had turned into this mob. And so Sunday night rolled around, and the Red Hot Chili Peppers were performing. And they just started these massive bonfires, like, 30 feet high. You could see them from the stage. There was like 5 major fires. And they were just ripping everything up, and they were pissed off by the expensive water and food, and they were turning over cars and spray painting greed on it, and they ripped out all the food, and they were just eating food, and they were just, looting everything and throwing the food. Like this guy described, they ripped open a truck, and there was frozen pretzels, and they just threw it into the bonfire. Like all this, they were just burning everything, the plywood, anything to get their hands on. And then the concert promoters went and asked whatever his name, Anthony Kiedis or whatever his name, this lead singer of the Red Hot Chili Peppers, to tone things down, like they were burning down the venue. And so they closed their set by playing Fire, which was like a song from, I don't know, like the original Woodstock from Jimi Hendrix or some other band. Don't care. Don't tell me, don't need to know. And then they were the mob went even farther south, and they were knocking over these huge towers with giant speakers on them and vandalizing them and burning them. And they just were like a horde. There was like, again, tens of thousands of these kids. And they just, they had these kids who were at the venues, and they're like old men now, describing, being a part of the riot and all these things. And they had to bring in the cops and with riot gear, and they dispersed this Lord of the Flies type mob that had been created, by lots of circumstances. And the guys who were running the venue were complaining that MTV made it sound worse than it was. And, and there was just the whole thing, like just like the cover up and the denial of these guys who decide to charge $4 for a bottle of water, because you go to these places like airports or, movie theaters or, concert venues where you pass through some sort of security, whatever it is, and then you're locked into that place. And you can't bring in food or water, and they overcharge you because they have a monopoly on things that you need. In this case, they were there, 3 or 4 days, and they had this overpriced food and water and things like this. These kids are just, just angry in general, and the music is amping them up, and the drugs and the living conditions, and they turn into just like the worst examples of humans, right? The adults setting them up for this, the boomers, and they're romanticizing the, Woodstock and the 60 movement and all these things. And I'm watching this, so the Olympics, right? These iconic Olympics, and America just folding and crumbling, right? All around us, everything getting suckier, and everything we've been told about America, everything that people, the sheeple have been indoctrinated with. And, Americans always rise up to the challenge, and the way that athletes aren't, and, the whole thing with COVID, and, just the crumbling of America being fragile and vulnerable and just ripe for the picking. And then watching this whole, the worst display of American youth and the entitlement. And, these are mostly rich kids, kids who are growing up, certainly compared to the rest of the world, but many of them growing up with privileges in suburbs and things like this. And then just going down into this level of behavior. And then, the music and the way the venue was set up and everything, encouraging this behavior and this, mindset. And then, 20 years later, watching what's happening now, right? I mean, again, there was a big event that was going to happen in 2 years that changed things, and the internet and all the rest of it. And just the weakness and there's nothing in American life right now that's being displayed by our leadership, by Hollywood, by the news media, and then average people, the way they display hostile and antisocial behavior on the internet. And most people don't even want it to continue. Like deep down, people are, they hate it. They hate their lives, and they're miserable, and, they're desperate for changing. They don't know what that change is. They can't rise up, do something, like the heartfelt meditation, something pure and spiritual, even though they're craving love, and they're craving a wholesome family, a throwback family. They're craving all the things that, traditional things that are now mocked and disparaged by the culture. They're craving to be natural human beings, be in a more village-based tribal situation, be more agrarian, be more in touch with nature and their food and things. I mean, these things are out there. Some people are conscious of them. Many people aren't, but they're deep down craving, interconnection with God and love, but they don't know how to get that. And they're just, America has jumped the shark, right? America's played out, and you just see it. I've been seeing it now for years, but it's even reached a quickening phase, right? And, and I wanted to say a little bit more about what I was talking yesterday about the heartfulness system and people who are, learning about it and practicing it and, starting to practice it. Now, what I've seen over my lifetime is that people have gotten worse. Each generation gets worse, not better. I mean, the lifestyle, maybe, your gadgets, yeah, sure, your gadgets, your technology, your way of life, right, has improved. But people themselves have gotten worse. People just keep on getting worse. And the youth of today, through, mostly no fault of their own, I mean, in terms of the way everything is shaped, have become so weak and entitled. And, I mean, they can almost not even function. They're not being groomed and trained to be the next generation of leaders, the next generation of functional people, right? They're not being trained to be competent human beings. They don't really have much of a future. They're depressed. They spend way too much time on the internet. They have more of a social life, and most of their life takes place in the cyber world in reality, and it just keeps on getting worse with each generation. I've seen it, over my lifetime, and most of all, just weaker and weaker. In the culture that's being pushed on them, there's the progressive, the weak and unnatural and ungodly progressive movement, the social system and the culture, and then there's just pure rage of the Republican right-wing people, right? The rage of the Trumpers, and then the rage of the liberals, and then these kids growing up in that, growing up in sort of a divorce between these two polarized points of view, both of them deeply flawed, and then not having the strength and the ability to reach up and find something, find the alternative that's been given to them to navigate through this time. You're always given a way out. You're always given a godly choice. The godly choice is always there. The divine choice, your soul's choice, is always there. But people rebel against it or can't find it or too stupid or too lost to understand, and they miss out on it. It's too subtle, right? Not appealing, or they're just too far gone, whatever it is. You can always choose God. You can always choose love. You can always choose the higher road. but very seldom do people do that. Over the years, I've gone through this myself, and in terms of, saving the system or, having some sort of change in the positive way. And what I've realized personally, and, maybe it's just because of what I do here and, whatever limitations in my vision of a holistic understanding of what's going on. But what I see, and this has, been predicted, and it's kind of obvious, I think, at this point, that things are going to have to get bad or worse before they get better. That there's not like a collective movement of people that are going to rise up to a higher level of consciousness and turn this thing around right now. Like things have to go even farther south before things can get better, right? And so, all the things that I'm doing here personally and with my family, in terms of doing the heartfulness meditation or telling other people about the heartfulness meditation and the, solution that has been given through it, a remedy to our current debauched system. And then this YouTube channel or building, a farm and food forest or whatever, things that I'm doing on a physical level is just, grinding it out, right? It's not looking for results or looking for something positive to happen or something to be turned around, but just building something, obviously for myself and my family, but for other people in the future, and just going in the right direction just to do it, right? Just to, have people out there. This is the idea behind Pockets of the Future. Just go in the right direction because, it's creating a momentum, it's creating a possibility, and it's something that's happening on a subtle level, certainly in the heartfulness system. It's happening on a spiritual level that people can't see, the controllers can't see, and they can't feel, but there's a building movement, and that movement will eventually create a vacuum, and people will get sucked into, going back to the old ways and connecting to God on a deeper level in these things. Maybe not for us, but future versions of ourselves and for future generations, just to give them, like it's planting a fruit tree for the future, right? Planting things so your kids and grandkids will have them, right? And so, that's what it's really become about for me at this point. Like I don't have much hope for, drastic positive changes right now, but at least we can start taking some baby steps for, the human race, right? At least do something, whatever positive energy and whatever you can muster up and, passing these things on to the desperate and, the generation of the doomed, right? That's following us here and just, providing some, positive and hopeful movements, things that they can build upon when they don't have a choice. Right now there's, it seems to be one choice and just ride out the system until it collapses. And then those of us who survive hopefully can figure it out. Only spirituality will save this world. It's Paul Romano, definitely reporting for the Apocalypse and the Ascension. Everyone have a blessed day and be grateful.